Hello, Murray. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi there. Welcome.
What time is it in Zurich?
It's 2:40 or 2:20. I'm sorry, 2:20.
2:20. And that's
Yeah.
not AM.
Oh,
That's PM. Good. I remember the first time I met you. It was in Journey into Holiness, and it was right over there, about 7 or 8 feet from here. And I know I had a question or something to debate with you, but I don't remember what it was. But we have surely enjoyed the long friendship. Appreciate your being with us several times. Great to have you here, and great to have your association with Steve. So I'm going to let Steve take over at this time. Good to see you.
thanks, Bob.
Hello, Murray. Good to see you.
Hi, Steve.
I'm going to give about a 8-minute introduction, and then we'll turn over to you with that, or maybe shorter. I'm going to spin this way so I can see both. So you can see the side of me, and then the other folks can see in front of me. So that would be clear. I want to say just a few words about the Asheville Jung Center and Murray Stein and everything he's done for us. I'm going to lower this. I'm not as tall as Bob, believe it or not. Or I'm not going to lower it. Okay, that's fine. So the Asheville Jung Center began about 5 years ago, and it was a brainchild of really Murray at mine. I don't know if you remember, but 5 years ago at the Chicago Institute, Murray, you and I kind of met and said, why don't we try this experiment, thinking that it was just a 1, maybe 2-time event, and it has just exploded since then. We wanted to connect Asheville with Zurich, Switzerland, and Murray. And then every month or two we did them, they got larger and larger. We have 20,000 kind of people worldwide that receive our emails, and we have 50 countries that connect, sometimes all simultaneous with us. We've now done 40 seminars, and the majority of which have been with Murray. Murray's done most of our seminars with that. And they're wide-ranging, from individuation to the basics of Jungian psychology as well. We're about to change our format, and this would be a good time to let people know what we're doing. Starting July 27th, our new format are Saturday mornings, noon to 1:30. That's evening time for Murray, but that allows people who are working, allows Jung centers to join us. Should be a whole lot easier with that. We've already had 2 or 3 Jung centers sign up, meaning that if you have a group of people, it doesn't have to be a formal Jung center, but if you want to meet for an hour and a half with us through Skype, through virtually the same technology, different brand, but it's like Skype, you could be at your center with 5, 10, 15 people, and you could plug in with us, and we could do this kind of live. We split any proceeds, any money you raise, half covers our overhead, you keep the other half. And then after you unplug, you can have a conversation on what you just learned with that. So be thinking about that. If anybody wants to join our Saturdays from Zurich, please do. July 27th is art. Murray and a couple other analysts are going to be talking about art and Jungian psychology. John Hill, anybody know John Hill? John Hill is a wonderful Irishman living in Zurich, has done a few things of ours, incredible, neat guy. Just you'll see if you ever see anything John Hill does. He's going to do it on the afterlife. So life after death from a Jungian perspective. John Hill, September 21st. And then November 23rd, Ursula Wirtz and Trauma, another wonderful Jungian analyst, is going to do that with us. So if anybody wants to join us, please do. If you're not getting our emails, give me or Ryan your email. We'll add it to our list of 20,000, and you'll start receiving those. But we would love to have any of the Jungian groups of people from here that would like to join us. We would love to have that. So Saturdays at noon. So today, Murray Stein is going to be speaking to us. We're going to make it as interactive as possible. Every so often, Murray will break, and people can come up to this microphone. At the time, turn and face that camera right there. Murray can see you. You can talk to him. He can talk to you. You can ask him a direct question on anything you've heard, and it's a delightful way to feel like you're in Zurich. It's just close to Zurich. He's outside of Zurich itself, but was in Zurich this morning. Murray has already been partly introduced, but I'll kind of finish that up. Amazing Jungian. I think he's one of the kind of foremost Jungians really in the world. He's been, up until recently, president of one of the institutes there, the International School of Analytical Psychology. in Zurich, Switzerland. Stepped down recently. There's a new president there. He's been president of the main Jungian body, International Association of Analytical Psychology. He's written a huge amount. If you Google him in Amazon or anywhere else, you'll see just a huge number of books he's written that are really just fabulous, fabulous books. Lots of articles, lots of presentations, 30 or so from us in the Asheville Jung Center. He has a Master's of Divinity, which is from Yale, which is interesting to this group here. He has a PhD in religion and psychology, so he's got a lot of academic training. And is a supervising training analyst at the ISAP, International School of Analytical Psychology, Zurich. So without further ado, we will turn it over to Dr. Murray Stein.
Thank you, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hear and see? Okay, good. I'm sitting in my office here in the middle of Switzerland, in the mountains of Switzerland, near the capital, Bern. It's called the Bernese Oberland, not very far from the Jungfrau and famous ski areas and so on. Quite a long distance from you all in North Carolina at Canoga. So it's one of the wonders of our age that we can do this kind of thing. I can be here and speak with you, and you can speak back to me, and we can have a conversation and a dialogue. And I hope that what I'm saying today will relate to your own experience, to maybe some dreams you've had, maybe life experiences you've had, and we could share some of that in our discussion later. Theoretical, more or less abstract description of the transformation process, experience of liminality, with some examples from social anthropology, from some experiences you've had you can relate to. These comments about liminality and liminal communities, unitas, and so what I would like to do now is to look at 3 biographies. And what the study of biography do is allow you to step back from your own a bit and look objectively at the life of somebody else. And see if we can pick out aspects from these rather famous, well-known people's lives that correspond to the experiences of liminality and transformation that I've described. When I wrote my book, it just happened that I was interested in reading about these 2 painters at the same time, these artists, Rembrandt and Picasso. And they're very instructive because so much is known about their lives. And the biographies that have been written about them are very good, very detailed, extensive, as much as one can know about somebody who lived as long ago as Rembrandt did, 17th century. And then, of course, Jung. And I'm most familiar, of course, with Jung's life, much more than with the other 2. But I would like to say just a few things about Rembrandt, Picasso, and then I will go into more detail about Jung's life. Try to illustrate these points about liminality and experience of transformation and the results of transformation, using Jung as an example. What I don't want to do is say that these 3 examples are necessarily in any way ideals. They're simply lives that are well known and have been studied and can learn from them. Every human life has its flaws, has its problems, has its shortcomings. So I don't want to create a sense of ideal there. I just want to look at them for what we can learn from them that might benefit our own individuation processes as well. So let me start with Rembrandt, who was a painter of the 17th century. He was born in 1606 in Holland, and he lived most of his life in Amsterdam. He never traveled outside the country of Holland in his whole life, but he had a wide-ranging imagination, and he painted pictures that shows scenes from all over the world, especially the great biblical scenes, biblical themes that he painted. I'm sure some of you at least are familiar with many of his paintings. When I studied his life, I looked mostly at his self-portraits because I wanted to see how he was portraying himself with the view of asking how did he see himself change in the course of his lifetime? What was his self-consciousness like? And the portraits, his self-portraits, are very revealing. He painted about 100 of them in the course of his life, starting with very young. He began as a painter at the age of 15 or 16. His father wanted him to be a lawyer, sent him off to law school, that he decided to art school instead. His father wasn't too happy with that, but I think he knew that he had a very special gift because he, in the end, became probably the greatest painter of all time. So people with this kind of talent usually have a pretty good inkling that there's something there that is very special. And again, I'm not selecting him because he's so great, because he's interesting, and especially on this topic, because he lived a life of many ups and downs. The development is spiritual development. The second half of his life is so interesting to me. He became very successful when he was young as a painter in Amsterdam. And it was a time in Holland when there was a lot of money. The Dutch were all over the world. They had colonies in Indonesia and South Africa. They were trading with the whole world. It was really the heyday of Dutch society. They were at their peak. They're still pretty well off, but nothing like what they were back then. And the middle-class people of Amsterdam took great pride in their homes, and they would buy paintings to decorate their homes. And today, you find those paintings in the great museums of the world. I was in St. Petersburg not too long ago, and at the great art museum there, they have a room of Rembrandt's, about 20 of his paintings. I think it's one of the greatest, one of the largest single collections in the world, Hermitage, Petersburg. They're astonishing paintings. My experience, I don't know what yours is, but I'm not particularly visually oriented, but when something strikes me visually, it really has a big impact. And I was at a art exhibition in Zurich recently. Chagall was being shown. There was a Chagall exhibition. I've looked at Chagall paintings in books all my life, and I'm very interested in his life too. But the difference between the real painting and the copy in a book is incredible. Those paintings just have you. They come out at you. They're alive. The colors are so vivid and strong. And it's the same thing with Rembrandt or any of the great painters. When you see the actual painting, you can see why they're so famous and why their works are so highly prized. They are alive. If you go to New York, there are a number of Rembrandts at the Metropolitan Museum and a great self-portrait in the, one of the Fifth Avenue. There's a museum up about 65th Street. Morgan, I think. It's one of the great self-portraits of Rembrandt. If you go in there and you walk past it, you'll see that his eyes follow you, right to left. Is vivid and alive. He, as I say, was very successful when he was young. His paintings sold at a good price, and he became quite wealthy. And he married a woman, also had a good inheritance. And so by the age of 30 or so, he was really living a very solid middle-class Dutch life. Had a nice house, he had a studio, had enough money, and he celebrates that in some of his self-portraits, where he's really top of his game. Well, things don't stay there forever. We know that. There are crises, there are falls and declines, as there have been since. And I think when he was about 35 years old, in his 30s, mid-30s, his wife suddenly died, illness, and this was devastating to him. And he began suffering a decline in popularity because the tastes were changing. Taste, and the young painters were showing new things that were increasing in popularity, and so his commissions declined. And he entered into a period of very severe stress around financial issues, to the point that at around the age of 50, he had to sell his house, give up his house, or put it in the name of his son, sell off most of his beautiful furniture and all the things he'd collected. And in the last part of his life, he died at the age of 62. He really lived quite a impoverished life, outwardly speaking, impoverished. But if you follow his portraits, you can see this ascent into a kind of successful grandiosity and celebration of his good fortune at midlife. And then there's this wonderful self-portrait of him as a kind of, a king-like figure. I don't know if you can see this so well. It's in my book. It's in black and white. It's at the Frick Museum. That's the name of it. Work on Fifth Avenue, about 60. There he is. He sort of looks like a king on the throne, but this is a very false impression that he's getting. He's showing you a persona, but actually he's poverty-stricken at this time. And he dresses himself up in these elaborate costumes, and shows himself as a very competent and successful artist, which I think is what he felt inside himself. He felt that he was at the top of his form as an artist, even though outwardly he was in very bad shape financially. And he'd taken up with a young woman. He wasn't married to her, but she was living with him, and this was a bit of a scandal. He discovered the anima in her. This also happens in the middle of life often, that an anima is discovered. Now this is a man, this is a soul figure. He finds his soulmate. And it's sometimes quite inconvenient when this. And so it was for Rembrandt, because it was a bit scandalous that she was living with him, they weren't married, they had a child. But he felt that he wasn't that interested in his public persona anymore, and he was painting for himself. And he became kind of, he became noted for his quick temper, his outbursts of anger at clients who wanted him to paint something that he didn't want to paint. He insisted on painting it the way he wanted to paint it. He wasn't into decorating their houses for them. He was a painter. He was an artist. And so to the end of his life, he really painted out of himself. And then what happens is that his self-portraits take a very interesting turn. Here's one from shortly before his death. You can see that. He's beginning to paint himself typically with a light shining on his forehead or from his forehead. It's almost like he's illuminated. And this light that shines from his forehead is a symbol of spiritual enlightenment or spiritual illumination. And nobody knows too much about his religious life or his inner life. He didn't belong to any religious communities. He grew up Catholic. I think his father changed to Protestant. He was quite attracted to the Mennonites, who were very important in Amsterdam at the time. And the Mennonites had this kind of inner life, religious practice. And he lived in the Jewish ghetto toward the end of his life. He painted pictures of some Jewish rabbis and a wonderful picture of a couple on the engagement, Jewish couple. But he was much more intent on developing a connection to his inner world and to his inner life. And he starts painting his face very realistically. So he's not showing off anymore. For instance, in this painting, this is a very late self-portrait. And it's very enigmatic, and nobody knows what it means exactly, but he's laughing. And it might be something like the Holy Fool, or a kind of transcendence from life, where he can treat everything with humor, or he's just laughing at the foibles of life and these people who want him to paint pretty pictures. One of the commentators on this picture said it was a reference to an ancient Greek painter who died laughing when a very wealthy matron came to him and asked him to paint her as Aphrodite. So here you see Rembrandt kind of seeing through it all, seeing through the disguises, through the personas, and just laughing about it. And then in one of his very last paintings, this may be his last self-portrait of all, paints himself as St. Paul. And this identification with St. Paul, I mean, he was under no illusions that he was St. Paul, but I think in St. Paul, as for many Protestant Christians of the day and to this day, St. Paul as sort of the second after Christ himself, Jesus Christ, exemplar of the spiritual man, or the great teacher, not quite a god, but certainly a very elevated spiritual figure. And I think he saw St. Paul as an aspect of himself, and he paints his self-portrait as St. Paul, which is quite astonishing. So there, I think you can see the evidence of this connection to the divine other within, to a spiritual or transcendent aspect of the self, and its incarnation in his life. So one of the strong features of individuation, of the ideas that Jung puts forward, and that some Jungians have picked up on, is that the individuation process is really a type of incarnation. The incarnation of the spiritual self over time that we are born with, but that takes sometimes quite a long time to incarnate, to bring into our lives and to live. And so he very naturally and very easily, or maybe not so easily, but naturally, he developed an ego in the course of things, the course of education, upbringing, but it's a little more rare that we incarnate some of these other aspects of the self, and especially this divine inner other. So this very late self-portrait of Rembrandt's suggests to me that he did reach that level of association with the spiritual other that was important to him in his tradition and the Christian tradition and in his time. He certainly was not a saint. Well, he was not, a saintly or a good person, but I do believe he was, in the end, an enlightened soul, and that he had glimpsed this transcendent other within his own life, within his experience. And he painted it. So it was his way of incarnating his individuation process. Now I want to change to a very different kind of painter, Picasso. He's a 20th century painter. His years are 1881 to 1972. He lived a very long life. Rembrandt lived only to the age of 64, I think. Picasso lived a much longer life and a very modern life. When people speak about Picasso, they speak about the modern period, modern painting, modernity. There was nothing at all religious about Picasso. He did not participate in religious culture whatsoever. You would have asked him, what is your religion? He would have said he's an atheist. In fact, for a while he joined the Communist Party, France, and he was but he didn't really participate. He was a kind of apolitical, a-religious person who really focused exclusively on his work, on his painting, and he was, from the beginning of his life, an extraordinary painter. Probably as talented as Rembrandt as a painter, and became also famous at a pretty early age. Started painting when he was a child, and by the time he came to Paris in his adolescence or 20s, he became well known and recognized as a creative genius. He's often credited with transforming the whole artistic tradition in the West into what's now known as modern painting. Probably he wasn't totally responsible for that, but he certainly participated very strongly in it, and he's the kind of reference point for anybody who wants to speak about modernity and art. He also painted a number of self-portraits, but not a lot of explicit self-portraits like Rembrandt. In his early years, he painted a couple
Murray, when you hold up the books, can you hold them up a couple seconds longer? The camera takes a moment to focus. That'll give us a little bit better image.
Oh, sure. Here is a self-portrait of Picasso as a young man. And this is an explicit self-portrait where he's really painting himself. He paints what he sees when he looks in the mirror. His face is a little bit mask-like. He became very fascinated with African masks at one point in his life. This was in the around 1910 period, between 1910 and 1920, in the period of First World War. There was a show of African masks in Paris, and he went to look at it, and he became fascinated with them. And he started putting masks into his paintings. Maybe it was even earlier, 1908 or so. And then he painted a portrait of Gertrude Stein, one of his customers and supporters, and he painted her face as a kind of mask-like face. And she said to him, "Gosh, Picasso, that doesn't look at all like me." And Picasso said, "It will, it will." So, maybe a kind of intuition of where she was going in her. But with these masks, he began picking up what we think of as archetypal elements. They're no longer personal, but they suggest or they symbolize certain kinds of states of mind or attitudes, themes, and so on. And after that, Picasso could paint himself into paintings, but as in a kind of disguise. He might paint himself as a faun or as a minotaur. That was one of his favorites. Putting himself into paintings, but not explicitly. And so there's a kind of indirect self-presentation. And he was very connected to the instinctual side. His famous for his sexuality, his relations with women, his kind of rampant animal energy. He had very dark eyes, and when he would look at people, they said it was like he was devouring them. He would just eat them with his gaze. Very intense and very, very in the body, physical man. And so when he painted his self-portraits as a minotaur, it was that half animal, half human representation of himself. We could say he connected, he integrated, he incarnated his physical, instinctual side fully and with complete acceptance, abandon, and enjoyed it. Now, the price you pay, there is a kind of connection, I think, in his relationship to the animal, the sacred animal, the bodied animal, that you find in literature, also D.H. Lawrence, for instance. The way to the transcendent is through the animal. This is characteristic of modernity, in a sense, that as the moderns lost their religious convictions that angels and transcendent beings, metaphysical beings in the heavens, how did they find the transcendent? Well, the transcendent is an important part of life. One needs to find it somewhere. Typically, they find it in nature or in animals, the divine animal instincts. And Jung's take on Freud, for instance, was that Freud's connection to the transcendent was through sexuality. And Jung felt that Freud minimized it and demeaned it and reduced it to mere physicality. But if he'd gone into it further and into its symbolic meaning and its symbolic references, eros and the power of eros and the power of sexuality to connect and to unite and to enter into the experience of even transcendence and mystical experience, he would have come through the religious. And he was, in a sense, a religious man who didn't know it. That's Jung's take on Freud. So this finding access to transcendent through the body is a typical modern move or development, and this was Picasso's. And so when he paints himself in these animal forms, sometimes as a monkey, with a great sense of humor, he's very hermetic, very playful, and laid into his life, very sexual. I think what he's doing is telling us how he is accessing the depths of the unconscious, the archetypal world, and the realm of the transcendent. His late self-portrait is a very striking one. He painted this, I think, the year of his death or the year just before he died. And that is an image of fear of death. For him, he said, it shows my fear of death. It's the fear of an animal who's about to die and knows he will die. Now, animals, as far as we know, or we think, we aren't sure, we don't know what animals think and what they know, but to our knowledge, they don't know that they're going to die. Human beings know that they're going to die. It's one of the differences. We have that kind of consciousness. And there are some people who say that's the reason we have religion. That we know we're going to die, there's an end to this life, and so there is the whole business of exploring the possibilities of afterlife, soul, and so on. Animals might not know they die, but at the moment of death, I'm sure they're as terrified of it as we are on an animal level. And Picasso's close connection to the animal and the animal fear of extinction is represented in this late self-portrait. Now, some people have said about the self-portrait that Picasso used it as a apotropaic device. That means to hold off fear. It's a kind of defense against the fear. So if you express the fear picture like this, it's like you've put it outside yourself into the picture and relieved yourself of the anxiety. There's that interpretation of this picture, that he's using this. And there are 2 or 3 of these late self-portraits like this very anxious looking face, wide open eyes, terrified in the face of death. I think this kind of terror in the face of death is also a product or a typical result of the modern attitude toward death, that modern life, secular life, non-religious, scientific mindedness, and so on, but really, there is no sense of an afterlife. So one is confronted with mortality in a very different way than traditional people with religious belief are confronted. They could have the comfort of a conviction of faith in an afterlife that could contain their fear, lay their fear as they pass through the experience of that. Picasso didn't have that, and so he represents the end of his life in this very terror-stricken face. So those are 2 examples. Now, Picasso, I think, achieved a full incarnation of his being as an artist, and his being as a creative personality, and linked himself to many levels and depths of the psyche and the unconscious. I think he linked himself to the spiritual in this direction of the sacred animal. So it's another version, you could say, of achieving the imago of a fully realized personality. I would say either Rembrandt or Picasso arrive at the end point of individuation, but I am saying it seems to be, looking at their lives in these pictures, that they achieved a good degree of it, and that they were quite aware their own ways of having explored, brought out into the open and into consciousness vast territories of their personalities. Say the individuation process is the development of your personality, development of the personality that you potentially have in you, taking it to its highest point, its greatest degree, possibility. So now I'm going to look at Jung a bit and think about his experience of individuation, because that's really where we get our deepest understanding of, I think, the individuation process in a psychological sense. Yes, you've all seen that.
Oh, yes. We have it in the lobby.
There you have it in the lobby, great. Jung, we know a lot more about Jung's individuation now than we did before this book was published in 2009. Although there were many hints in his other writings, and more than hints, actually, very useful descriptions of his experience in this period, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, for instance, in Chapter 6, Confrontation with the Unconscious. There's a lot of information, but the Red Book really fills it out and gives a huge amount of detail that we can really see, especially with all the footnotes that the editor put in there. A lot of the detail of his experiences. Now, you really can see an early Jung, pre-Red Book, and a post-Red Book. It's almost like the caterpillar or butterfly, okay? And the Red Book period is the stage of the pupa, where he's kind of encased himself in an inner process, very private and very transformative period of liminality in his life. The onset of this transformation period in Jung's life was triggered by a separation. Like these two painters I've described, he was very successful early in life. He became a very well-known, internationally recognized doctor, psychiatrist, and psychological researcher. Became famous with Freud for psychoanalysis discovery and the founding of the psychoanalytic movement. And then, similar to Rembrandt's experience, there's a sudden and abrupt change or falling off and a decline before there is another steady climb onwards and upwards. This departure, this leave-taking with Jung from Freud is very traumatic and very, very hurtful for both. They came to an impasse in their relationship, very angry, very betrayed, feeling disappointed, gone a good distance with each other. Now there was a parting of ways. So it was not a happy or a friendly or a even civil separation of ways. It was very sharp, very angry, and very painful. And in some sense, neither one of them ever quite recovered from it completely. They remembered that for the rest of their lives. And that they both went on to greater and greater things as well. But this threw Jung into a period of self-examination, as I said before, Elmer called creative illness, which he went very deeply into his own inner process. Decided to explore his inner world using this tool that he came up with that was later named active imagination, a kind of imaginal conversation, dialogue with our figures, very intense for a period of time. And then all the work with the material that had come out in this opening during the height of his liminality, or depth of his liminality, working with that material for the next 10 or 15 years and producing what we now see in the Red Book, all the colorful pictures, the calligraphic script, all the commentary, all the reflection. So what he did was take the material that erupted, that emerged during this cocoon stage, and worked it and reworked it, and reflected on it, and painted it, and interpreted it, all in the attempt to integrate its meaning. If you follow the figure of the narrator through the Red Book, you can see that he doesn't become these other figures that he's having conversations about, even momentarily, with a couple of exceptions. When he, for a moment, he becomes a kind of Christ-like figure and goes through a crucifixion process. But mostly it's dialogue with the other. And these dialogues with the inner other eventually come to an apex or a fulfillment, a high point, in his conversations with Philemon. Philemon is a wise old figure, teacher, a representative of Gnostic wisdom, and very definitely in contact with the transcendent world. There's a moment where Philemon disappears for a little while, and then he comes back, and Jung asks him, "Where were you?" And he said, "Oh, I stepped out of time for a little while. I went to eternity, back now." So he's this link between time and eternity. That kind of figure is the exact parallel, you could say, to Christ, a Christ-like figure who also combines time and eternity, who comes into time and leaves time, and links time and eternity, and brings from eternity into time wisdom and teaching and all that we have in the New Testament. And Jesus' teachings. I was in Israel for the first time a couple of weeks ago. I spent 10 days there, and was at the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus delivered Beatitudes and walked on the water, and chose Peter and some of the other followers to follow him, where he caught fish. And then we went up to the Mount Tabor, they call it Mount Tabor, where there was the moment of transfiguration. Jesus was lifted up from the top of the hill, and his disciples saw him speaking to Moses and Elijah. Jesus is that kind of figure. He's in and out of time. He speaks with the Father, and he comes back. He speaks with the figures of the great figures of the past, the spirits, the spiritual ancestors, and he comes back again. And then he leaves, sends the Holy Spirit forward. So this is the kind of experience, in his own terms, that Jung is having in the Red Book with Philemon and some of these other figures. And it links him, as I said before, to this sense of the inner other, the greater inner other, that he then carries on dialogues and conversations with, more or less, for the rest of his life. So this life period really was the essential making of Jung's imago. It's where he became a butterfly, will. He became a personality that we recognize as Jung. Jung became Jung, became a Jungian. Before he was a scientist and a doctor and so on, but he really became another kind of teacher as a result of that experience. Right? Looking back now and reading the Red Book, we can see what happened to him and what transpired in his inner life. And so this coming into contact with the soul, he starts out the Red Book by calling out, "Soul, where are you? I haven't seen you for so long. Where have you gone?" And then she comes and they have a dialogue and the other figures appear. I'm involved here in Zurich in a performance of scenes from the Red Book. We took 7 scenes from the Red Book and put them on stage. So we have Paul Ritchie plays Jung and John Himmel plays Elijah and Philemon and so on. And it's very powerful. It's very moving to walk through these steps again. And we've given this performance a number of times. Next 2 weeks we're going to give it in Paris, and then we're going to give it in Copenhagen, and then in China. We're taking it to China and Taiwan. Worldwide. It's kind of thrilling to step into those scenes and those stories because they are so dramatic and so powerful. And what one comes away with is the feeling that this man really went through an amazing inner process and experience that made him into a figure that we know as Jung and that we know as the great teacher that he was. He's always been a successful individual. He had a lot of intelligence, energy, was a leader type. He's always been successful if he'd gone into business. Had a brother-in-law who was one of the big businessmen in Switzerland. He was the board of the bank. He ran the manufacturing companies in Switzerland, also a big man. So these two brothers-in-law were probably rivals with each other, but in very different areas. And Jung really became a spiritual teacher because of this experience that he had in his inner world. And so what he was able to do in his psychology was combine the idea of psychological development with spiritual development. And I think that's his unique contribution, because there are lots of other theories of psychological development, cognitive, all very useful and very important, but he brings it together as a type of development, we can call it spiritual development, links the conscious ego with the archetype world, the world of eternity, and also with the past, with the world of ancestors. So he overcomes this break of modernity that cut its links with the traditions in the past, spiritual and religious traditions. He overcomes those in a way, doesn't take him back into a kind of regression back to the Middle Ages, but he is able to bring all that kind of sensitivity to the spiritual world, the transcendent world, forward in a modern way. And I think that's his greatest gift to us, that we can learn from that, not to imitate him and try to make a copy of the Red Book on our own, but make our own version of individuation process that is conscious and moving in these directions, using tools that he offers, working with dreams, imagination, depth work and analysis, or in close relationship with someone you trust. Those elements that go into the Jungian way, if you will, can serve a lot of people to develop their full individuation potential and then move into their full Ago or state of incarnation of self. So I think, is it time for our next break, and we will have a period of discussion and questions.
Thank you so much, Murray, for another wonderful.
Hi, Murray. I'm Jameson Haverkamp. I have a question about the inner energy required during the liminal process. I am very much in my caterpillar mumminess right now. And I'm curious about, I think it's Marion Woodman who talks about putting a minimal amount of energy into the outer world during this time because so much energy is required during doing this inner work in the liminal process. And I've experienced this, the inner energy required is physically very intense and taking a lot of my energy. And I don't have as much for the outer world. Can you speak to suggestions either from yourself or Jung about managing kind of this imbalance of energy that, I don't know, maybe it doesn't go on with everybody, but how you would manage that when this can take a long time?
Right, okay. We speak about progression of libido and regression of libido. That's one way to think about it. When your energy is progressing into life, there is a kind of a movement forward, an expansiveness, adaptation to the world around you, whether you introverted or extroverted. You could do it in different ways. But basically, you're object-oriented and you're going outward and you're creating a life in a social sense and in a cultural sense. These are periods of growth and development that everybody can see. It's very outer and it's very evident. When the libido regresses for whatever reason, and there are different reasons it might regress. One reason might be a traumatic experience, a break, like you experience a break, Freud, or it might be a kind of feeling of stagnation, meaninglessness, boredom, futility, kind of depression sets in at a certain stage of life, and things that have been interesting and valuable to you and meaningful to you aren't anymore, or not to the same level of intensity. And then there's this regression of libido. And regression of libido means that the energy is flowing inward, not outward. It's not going into adaptation, build, construction. It's kind of disappearing from view, and it's activating parts of the unconscious, parts of your inner world, your subjectivity, that were dormant before, or that were repressed, or that were just unconscious, not as. Now, you could say liminality is this experience of regression of libido. When you don't have as much for outer activities, but you're drawn toward introspection. You're drawn toward the inner world. And this is exactly what happened in Jung's Red Book period, when it wasn't just the break from Freud, I think that triggered it, but then he resigned some positions that he had at the university and other professional positions, scholarship and this and that. And it wasn't that he was rejecting them, it was that he just lost interest in them. They didn't mean anything to him anymore. And what meant something to him was this inner process that had really taken over and going in a very intense way. And then his painting and his working on the Red Book. And so that started taking up an enormous amount of energy. If you think how much energy it took to create that Red Book, that was spent in his home, in his office, in the privacy of his space, and without anybody else around. He was very introverted. He was very interior. And then after a certain number of years, he started coming out again. And so then there was, again, a progression of libido, but now as a different kind of person, different interests and different priorities, different perspectives. He wasn't into becoming king of the world anymore before he was the crown prince of the psychoanalytic movement. It was a leader. I was much more a private teacher. People came to him, smaller groups. It wasn't the big show and extroverted to the professional world the same way, although he was still active there, but in a different way. So this is progression and regression of libido. When the libido regresses, it's much more intermittent. And I think culture that you all live in America, it's a little bit different here in Europe and Switzerland. It's a little more inverted here. But you live in an excessively, I would say, exaggerated, extroverted culture. This is known from the outside by the rest of the world. We aren't the only one. I think Brazil is very similar. There are countries that have this extraordinary amount of one-sided extroversion. If you want to go to the opposite side, maybe Japan or cultures that are much more inward, much more kind of holding back in themselves. And Switzerland is much more introverted. It's a good place for you to come when you want to go inward and follow your dreams and get back to imagination. Switzerland's an ideal place. So students come here and go on an inner journey and experience. And people here respect privacy much more. So when you're doing this in America, you're kind of odd to other people. Here you wouldn't look so odd if you're doing that kind of thing. It's a private person just like we are. We don't see her for a few months at a time. It's no big deal. So I think it is more difficult for Americans to afford themselves. It's not, I spent most of my life there, so I know it very well. I know how hard it is to get out of the collective. You're surrounded by it. It's constantly in your face. The news and the music and the media, all of that is constantly bombarding. It's very difficult to step out into a personal inner space. And yet, very important to do that at a certain times in life. So, when I've worked with people on this issue, the question always is, how can I how can I find a place of innocence and solitude, quiet, and it's a noisy country, and people interacting with each other, and that's beginning to be a problem. So, I think experiences like you're having at Kanuga do, even though it's in a collective, you're in a group, you're still interacting with each other, but I think you do value the privacy of dream work and interiority as respect, that you develop a sense of soul in spaces like this. And it isn't so common, so frequent in American life, but I think it is available, and you all have found a good place to begin your inner journey, continue your inner journey, your Kanuga. And then there are some times when you just have to take a break and, disappear for a while. Maybe you go to Alaska, or you come to Switzerland, or take a sabbatical. When I was in Israel, I was there for 2 Sabbaths, and in Jerusalem on the Sabbath, it's very hard to find a restaurant that's open. I mean, the city just closes down from Friday sundown until Saturday sundown. Much of the city is closed. In some neighborhoods, you can't even drive a car. And this is the Sabbath. So, on the Sabbath, I asked somebody, what do you do on the Sabbath? Because you can't drive a car, you can't even turn lights on and off. So many things you can't do, lots of rules. And these were observant Jews who, the wife is an analyst and the husband is a He's a very successful businessman, they have a big family. I said, what do you do on the Sabbath? He said, oh, the Sabbath, it's the day to recharge our batteries. He's a chemical engineer, he's into batteries. Okay? A day to recharge our batteries. I said, yeah, but what do you do? Oh, well, Friday night, Shabbat, our whole family comes together and we tell stories. And I mean, there's no TV, even the television is off. I mean, imagine that. We talk, we visit, we catch up with each other. It's a family night. Oh, what do you do on Saturdays? Oh, Saturday morning, we go to the synagogue and we pray for a while. And then we come home, and it's a day to be with each other, to be with the family, to read, to just be ourselves, not to go anywhere, not to do any work, not to think about work. You see, this is an age-old tradition that was found to be very useful by the Israelites, 3,000-4,000 years ago, and continues to this day. We have a version of it in Switzerland too. The stores are all closed on Sundays here. There's from 4 o'clock on Saturday until Monday morning, stores are closed. And so it's quiet. You can have a quiet time. Now that's a moment for introversion. It's a period of time when you can let go all your other cares, go inward, you pray, meditate, you read the Bible, you do some active imagination, and it's built into the structure of life. I think it's a wonderful institution, but we've overridden it, like we override the day and night with our electric lights. We don't live with nature. So these rhythms that people discovered thousands of years ago are very important to rest, to develop interiority, develop deeper relationships with our families, and so on. And I think it's a great loss when is just put all this stuff aside. And with the religious element, it isn't the same either, because on the Sabbath, it's meant to be close to God, it is to be close to the Spirit, the spiritual world, and renew the connection to that. So, one's own way, one can do that on an individual basis, but it's difficult. There are many demands, this thing all the time. Cell phones. To put this up for a whole day on a regular basis, not so easy, but I recommend it.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first has arisen when I was listening, and the image of trauma came in my mind and being fragmented, in a state of fragmentation.
Yeah.
And you are frankly using that type of words when you were speaking about transformation. And I was wondering if people feel traumatized, feel fragmented, would you say they could follow the same guidelines? Is there a gradual difference, or would you say, well, keep in mind when you feel fragmented through trauma, don't go to the inner journey and stay there and all those things. You need some cautions or whatever. Can you expand that a little bit?
Yes, sure. So much depends on what kind of trauma it is, what the circumstances of the trauma are, who's being traumatized. If you're traumatized as a child, sexually abused, and so on, no, there's no way you could use any of this. Ursula Wirtz, who will appear on the National program in November, gave a series of lectures here at Zurich last year on trauma and working with trauma. And she's worked with people all over the world across extremely traumatizing situations, war, disruption, refugee camps, physical abuse of all kinds, and worked with them in therapy. And her feeling which will appear in the book that will be published from these lectures that we're going to pass here later this year, is that the cracks are where the light comes through. The cracks are where the light comes through, she says. And having had a lot of experience with trauma and working with trauma, she says that it's paradoxically sometimes in these places of break and disruption and fragmentation that one experiences the healing power of the divine or the presence of the other. There is a kind of opening involved. So there is that possibility. And I think working with people who have been traumatized carefully in therapy, maybe one can arrive at that kind of experience, possibly. But I wouldn't make it a formula or a recipe of any kind. I'm reading a book right now on this Jewish ghetto labor camp called Theresian stuff. It's in the northern part of Czechoslovakia. It was the mildest of the death camps. It wasn't really a death camp, it was a work camp, but a lot of people died there and suffered and so on. And it was a liminal community. Jews were brought from several different parts of Europe and thrown into this camp in a very formal and very rigorous way. It was like suddenly you're taken into a very severe and depriving atmosphere and situation. Take off your clothes, take a shower, and you stand for a couple of hours while your clothes are being deloused. Many people died from this because of the colds they were exposed to. And then you're put into situations where you have nothing, you have no identity other than your name. But out of these camp experiences, there came some extraordinary works and writings, like Frankel's Lothar, for instance. Even in the depths of traumatic experiences like this, where the intention is not all transformational, the intention is punishment or isolation, alienation. It's possible some people have found levels of insight, inspiration, and depth that they wouldn't have found in normal life. It isn't to recommend it at all, but it's to say that when it does happen, one could maybe keep an eye out for that. And certainly in many people experience that in like Great Depression and in this recession, terrible suffering happens to people. They lose their possessions and their houses and everything. There is another development that can come into play that is very authentic, psychologically speaking, of individuation and growth and depth, of relationship, of empathy, of caring for others, of moments of transcendence, simply because one is kind of specific. So, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to speak about trauma in these terms, but I think it is possible. And Ursula Wirth speaks about it very movingly as examples of stories about how and why she feels that the cracks are where the light is.
Thank you. That is helpful to have that insights. And male painters, I feel I'm a little bit in doubt. Can I identify fully with the whole story? or should I look for some adjustments as a woman? I hope you can say a word about it, but from feminist psychology, I know that the theme of otherness, especially, is somewhat different for men and women. And the theme of otherness, finding the inner other, that is somewhat different for men and women, the importance of that theme. Like women are somewhat more socialized to have that image of the other inside already. I'm not sure that you can give some insights about it. I was thinking that maybe centeredness would be helpful for some women, instead of having that measure of you should end up with otherness again. But I hope the question is clear.
I think maybe what I meant by otherness wasn't so clear. I think of the Annunciation, where Mary is addressed by the angel who comes to her and says, "You're going to have a child." That's the experience of others that I'm talking about. The transcendent other.
I understand that.
Yeah. Now, in the Jungian discussion about women and female psychology and so on, that experience has been traditionally Jungian discussed as the animus experience. The animus experience. The animus is inner other. For the man, the anima is the inner other. It can be the wise old man. I mean, again, formulas, but if you read Barbara Hanna, for instance, who in Zurich at the Jung Institute for a period of decades lectured on the animus. The animus means spirit. Animus, the word spirit. So it's a woman's spiritual life. And it appears as a masculine figure, sometimes like an angel or a non-sexual figure. It isn't a self figure. It's a connection. It's a link to the self. It's going toward the self. And so it's like Angel Gabriel coming to Mary and making his announcement. Or in dreams, you dream about male figures of all different kinds, but you can divide them into good and bad. I mean, there are the bad males and there are the good males. As inner others, they can be two sides of the unconscious, two sides of the aspect of the woman that she experiences, whether as the inner critic or as a spiritual life, or as a lightful figure, guide, or hermetic trickster. So that's what I mean by inner other.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mary, and many of us here have white hair and are
Yes.
a certain age. And in a way, I think my question falls into what you've just said about the Islamic world, in that frequently we find ourselves being with someone in that final time of meeting death and that final transformation, and that they suddenly are very aware of their spiritual life. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for us on how to be with our friends and loved ones at that final stage of transformation.
It's a very individual thing because it depends on what's going on with that loved one who's going through that process. And I think all therapists have to do, who have to take the measure of the person that you're with and they can handle and where they are in their development and their consciousness. And be there accordingly. but I would say be as fully with them and as present psychologically and spiritually as possible, as they can stand or they can accept. I trained as a minister originally. I never practiced it very much, but I remember going into hospital settings as kind of training in chaplain work, trying to minister to people who are very ill, dying. And at that time I was very young. I didn't know what to do other than say a few prayers, maybe speak with a family, with the relatives. It's a very awkward situation because it's so extreme. It's one of the biggest experience of life is to die. And how can you be with somebody in that moment or in that phase that isn't superficial and trivial and disrespectful where they are or unempathic with where they are. I think it's a very difficult situation. I have to know the person well, that they're developed psychologically, spiritually. It's much easier. And you can really share wonderful things with people in that or in that stage of life. A friend who died last year, she was 80, I think 82 or 83, and her husband had died about 5 or 6 years earlier. They'd been very close. So this last 5 years, she'd been in, sort of adjusting her into her widowhood, and she had a family, but she was a very, very spiritual, advanced person. She had meditated for 30 years in Zen practices. She had a good, strong Christian background. As a child, she grew up in the church, and she hadn't left that. She could still use it. She had many resources. She was a Jungian analyst. She had her dreams. She had studied world religion, mythologies. And I had the privilege of watching her go through this, and I was right beside her. I would talk to her once a week or so, and we would talk. And to the very last hour, she was fully conscious. She knew that she was, and she could talk about it. But it didn't limit her, other than the pain occasionally, from doing things with her family, from playing games with her grandchildren. She wasn't bedridden the whole time. Toward the end she was. But she had this, she kept meditating through the whole thing, and she said if she used her meditation, she didn't need painkillers as much, so her mind could stay clear. So she kind of meditated her way through it. And her daughter told us that as she was dying in the last day, right before she died, they took her to the hospital because it's clear that these were her final hours and they could care for her better in the hospital. And the daughter was called in the middle of the night to come. The nurse said, "If she's going now, you want to be here." So the daughter went there and found her mother in the bed. And the mother said, "Would you help me out of the bed? I'd like to sit on my pillow. I feel more grounded on my." She had a meditation pillow. "I want to sit on my pillow." So she sat on her pillow, conscious, and aware, and then, "Could you help me back into my bed?" Went back into the bed. The daughter sat with her, and a few moments later, she passed away. And it was, I've never experienced such an acceptance of the death process in anyone. From the moment she got her diagnosis 5 months earlier, inoperable, nothing we can do to treat it. here are the options. She said, well, I don't want anything extreme. I'll just go through with it. And she was able to talk about her feelings and be with other people. She even supervised some cases the last months. It was just an extraordinary thing. She didn't close off. She didn't disappear. She was quite cheerful on the phone when I talked to her. So people die in such different ways. I guess they die the way they lived. And I think if you're open to the spiritual significantly before you die, and you have the integration process running and extending into that area so that you can be at home in your mortality and your immortality, and you can accept the process, I think you die in a very different way. You aren't fighting it. I had another friend who died not so long ago. He was also a very senior analyst. He didn't want to die at all. But he was very cheerful when people came to visit him in the hospice. And he fought it to the end. He said, I don't want to die, I'm not ready yet. But he knew it was coming and kind of grudgingly accepted it. I was open to talk about it with people. And so, it depends on how the person is going through the process. You can be with them in that way, in the way they can accept it, they want to allow you into their inner world, into their space.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Yeah. Well, Murray, I'd like to thank you yet again for just a spectacular